What does it mean to live faithfully? In a world driven by ambition and marked by a constant pursuit of success, this question stands out as both countercultural and deeply profound. For many, success is about climbing ladders, ticking off goals, or building a legacy that will be remembered. Yet, C.S. Lewis, a writer, thinker, and man of profound Christian faith, offers us a different vision. To Lewis, the measure of success is not found in the applause of others or the milestones we achieve, but in the quiet, steady faithfulness of a life devoted to God. Success, as he saw it, is not something we construct. It's something God writes when we hand him the pen. Lewis's own life reflected this idea. Though he is celebrated today as one of the greatest Christian writers of the 20th century, his journey was not one of immediate acclaim or worldly recognition. He began his career as an academic, teaching at Oxford and later Cambridge, and much of his early life was shaped by personal struggles, including the loss of his mother, his experiences in the trenches of World War I, and his years of wrestling with doubt and atheism. Yet, through all of this, Lewis's life became a testament to what happens when a person commits to living faithfully, trusting God's purpose even in seasons of uncertainty. For Lewis, faithfulness begins with a simple but profound posture: surrender. This surrender isn't about passivity or inaction, but about aligning our will with God's. As he famously wrote in Mere Christianity, "The more we let God take us over, the more truly ourselves we become, because he made us. He invented us. He invented all the different people that you and I were intended to be." Living faithfully means trusting that God, who knows us better than we know ourselves, is far more capable of shaping our lives into something meaningful than we ever could on our own. Imagine for a moment that your life is like a book. We often want to be the authors of our stories, meticulously planning every chapter and choosing each twist and turn that we think will lead to happiness, recognition, or security. But Lewis reminds us that the most compelling stories aren't written by the characters themselves. They're shaped by the author. In the same way, when we let God be the author of our lives, our story becomes something far richer and more beautiful than we could ever imagine. This surrender, however, requires a shift in focus. Instead of asking, "How can I make my life successful?" we begin to ask, "How can I live faithfully today?" Faithfulness is not measured by outward achievements or how others perceive us. It is found in the small, quiet decisions we make each day to honor God. As Psalm 1 verse 2 describes, "But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night." This delight is what anchors us, shaping our thoughts, desires, and decisions. When we delight in God and his word, we open our hearts to his leading, trusting him to guide us on a path we cannot fully see. So how do we live faithfully in a world obsessed with self-made success? What does it look like to surrender our plans and trust God to write our story? Let's turn to Lewis's life and writings to find the answers to these questions. Through his words and his example, we can begin to see that true success is not something we chase. It is something God shapes as we walk faithfully with him. To understand how to live faithfully and trust God to write our success story, we must first examine what faithfulness looks like in practice. For C.S. Lewis, faithfulness began with a commitment to the small, ordinary acts of obedience that often go unnoticed. He recognized that the Christian life is not lived in dramatic moments, but in the quiet, persistent choices we make each day. One of Lewis's most famous illustrations of this idea comes from the Screwtape Letters, where he presents a series of letters written by a senior demon, Screwtape, to his apprentice Wormwood. In these letters, Screwtape warns Wormwood that the enemy, that is God, does not require grand displays of piety or extraordinary acts of service from his followers. Instead, God desires their simple daily faithfulness. Screwtape laments that when a Christian chooses to pray, forgive, or resist temptation in the mundane moments of life, it builds an unshakable foundation of faith. Faithfulness, then, is not about achieving extraordinary things in a worldly sense. It is about living with integrity, humility, and devotion in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. As Lewis once wrote, "The great thing, if one can, is to stop regarding all the unpleasant things as interruptions of one's own or real life." The truth is, of course, that what one calls the interruptions are precisely one's real life, the life God is sending one day by day. This perspective challenges us to reevaluate how we view our lives. How often do we see our current circumstances, whether they involve a frustrating job, a season of waiting, or seemingly small responsibilities, as interruptions to the life we want? Lewis would encourage us to view these moments not as obstacles, but as opportunities to practice faithfulness. Each small choice to trust God, to work diligently, or to serve others is part of the story he is writing for us. He wrote because he felt called to use his gifts to serve God and communicate truth, regardless of how it was received. This willingness to let go of worldly validation and trust in God's purposes is central to living faithfully. It requires us to shift our focus from short-term results to eternal significance. As Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity, "Aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you will get neither." When we fix our eyes on God, trust in Him to guide our steps, we often find that the success He brings is far greater than anything we could have achieved on our own. An example from Lewis's own life illustrates this beautifully. When he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, he did not set out to create a literary masterpiece. He simply wanted to tell a story that would point readers, especially children, to the deeper truths of the Christian faith. Yet, in surrendering his ambitions to God, Lewis created a series that has impacted millions of lives, far exceeding anything he might have envisioned. This is the paradox of living faithfully. When we let go of control and trust God, He often brings about success that is both unexpected and eternal. Living faithfully also involves embracing humility, a virtue that Lewis emphasized repeatedly. In The Weight of Glory, he described humility as the posture of recognizing our dependence on God and our responsibility to love and serve others. Humility frees us from the need to compare ourselves to others or to compete for recognition. Instead, it allows us to focus on the work God has given us, trusting that He will use it for His purposes. But how do we cultivate this kind of faithfulness in a world that constantly pulls us toward pride, self-reliance, and distraction? For Lewis, the answer lies in staying connected to God through prayer, scripture, and community. These practices ground us in God's truth and remind us of His faithfulness, even when we cannot see the full picture of what He is doing in our lives. As Psalm 37 verse 5 reminds us, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act." This promise encourages us to take the next step of faith, even when the path ahead is unclear. Lewis's life and writings remind us that success is not found in striving, but in surrender. Not in making a name for ourselves, but in making His name known. When we live faithfully, we invite God to write a story that is far greater than anything we could plan. To delve deeper into what it means to live faithfully, let us consider another vital theme from C.S. Lewis's writings, the importance of perseverance. Faithfulness is not a one-time act, nor is it something we do only when life feels easy or when the rewards are obvious. True faithfulness is revealed in seasons of difficulty, doubt, or monotony, when continuing to trust God requires more courage than dramatic acts of faith. Lewis understood the human tendency to want immediate results. We often crave a visible outcome for our efforts, whether in our careers, relationships, or spiritual lives. But in The Problem of Pain, he reflects on how God's work in us often takes time and involves seasons of refining. He writes, "We are, not metaphorically but in very truth, a divine work of art, something that God is making, and therefore something with which He will not be satisfied until it has a certain character." This image of God as an artist reminds us that the process of becoming the people He has called us to be may not always feel comfortable. but it is always purposeful. Think of a sculptor working on a block of marble. The process of chiseling away at the stone may seem destructive at first, yet every strike of the hammer is intentional, shaping the material into something beautiful. In the same way, living faithfully requires trusting that God is shaping our lives, even when we don't fully understand His methods or timing. As Lewis would remind us, the Christian life is not about seeing the finished product immediately, but about trusting the artist who sees the masterpiece before it is complete. Another essential element of faithfulness is learning to resist distractions. Lewis was acutely aware of how easily we are drawn away from the things that matter most. In the Screwtape Letters, Screwtape encourages Wormwood to use distraction as a weapon against Christians. He doesn't suggest leading them into grand acts of rebellion, but instead advises filling their lives with noise, busyness, and trivial pursuits. As Screwtape says, "The safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts." For us today, this warning feels more relevant than ever. We live in an age of endless distractions, from social media to career demands to the constant pressure to achieve more. It is easy to lose sight of what truly matters when we are caught up in the urgent but unimportant. Lewis's writings challenge us to step back, evaluate our priorities, and ensure that we are dedicating our time and energy to things of eternal value. Faithfulness often involves saying no to distractions so we can say yes to God's calling. Faithfulness also requires dependence on God's strength, not our own. Lewis frequently emphasized that the Christian life is not about self-reliance or moral perfection, but about surrendering to the grace of God. In Mere Christianity, he explains this dynamic. God works on us in all sorts of ways, but above all, He works on us through each other. Men are mirrors or carriers of Christ to other men. This reminds us that living faithfully is not something we do in isolation. We need the support of Christian community to encourage us, hold us accountable, and point us back to God when we are tempted to stray. Let's not forget that faithfulness also calls us to trust God with the outcomes of our lives. We often want assurance that our efforts will bear fruit, that the work we are doing is meaningful, or that the sacrifices we make are worthwhile. But Lewis shows us that trusting God means relinquishing the need to control outcomes. As he wrote in The Weight of Glory, the present is the only time in which any duty can be done or any grace received. This insight reminds us to focus on being faithful in the present moment, leaving the results in God's hands. In his own life, Lewis modeled this trust in small and large ways. His commitment to serving others, whether through his writing or his personal relationships, was not driven by a desire for recognition. For instance, during World War II, Lewis opened his home to children evacuated from London and volunteered to deliver R.A.O. Talks on Faith to a Nation in Crisis. These actions may not have seemed glamorous, but they were expressions of faithfulness in the roles God had given him. Ultimately, faithfulness is about aligning our hearts with God's purposes, trusting that He is working in and through us, even when we cannot see the full picture. It's about persevering through the ordinary and the difficult, resisting the pull of distractions, and placing our lives in the hands of the One who knows the end from the beginning. Through Lewis's life and writings, we see that this kind of faithfulness is not just a duty. It is an act of profound trust and a pathway to true joy. When we live faithfully and let God write our success story, something extraordinary happens. The pressure to control, strive, and prove ourselves begins to lift, and in its place, we find freedom. Freedom to trust, to rest, and to live in alignment with God's purposes. C.S. Lewis reminds us that surrendering to God is not a loss but a gain, because God's plans for us are infinitely greater than anything we could imagine or achieve on our own. Success, in God's terms, is not about recognition, wealth, or even accomplishment. It's about walking humbly with Him, doing the work He has set before us, and loving others with the grace we have received. It's about being faithful in the ordinary moments, trusting that God will weave them together into something extraordinary. As Lewis himself said, there are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind. This kind of success doesn't always look impressive by the world's standards. It may mean being faithful in a job that feels thankless, loving a difficult person, or trusting God in a season of waiting. But when we measure success through God's eyes, we see that these acts of faithfulness have eternal significance. They are part of the story God is writing, not just for our lives, but for His kingdom. Lewis's life offers a glimpse of what it looks like to trust God with our story. His greatest successes were not the result of his own ambition, but of his willingness to surrender his gifts to God's purposes. From his academic work to his theological writings to the Chronicles of Narnia, Lewis's legacy was shaped not by his pursuit of worldly greatness, but by his faithfulness to the calling God placed on his life. So how can we apply this to our own lives? It begins with a simple prayer. Lord, I trust you. Use my life for your glory. From there, we commit to the daily act of surrender, seeking God in prayer, delighting in His word, and walking in obedience to His will. As Psalm 37 verse 23 reminds us, the Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in Him. When we delight in Him, He guides our steps, even when we cannot see where the path is leading. Living faithfully doesn't guarantee a life without challenges. In fact, it often means walking through trials, waiting patiently, or doing unseen work. But it does mean living a life that matters, a life that reflects God's glory and points others to Him. When we let go of the need to write our own success story and allow God to be the author, we discover that His story is always greater, always richer, and always more beautiful than anything we could create. So today, take heart. Faithfulness is not about achieving perfection or chasing the world's definition of success. It's about trusting the one who holds the pen, living each moment with humility, and believing that He is writing a story far better than you could ever imagine. Through faithfulness, we don't just build a life, we build a legacy that points to the faithfulness of God Himself. If this message has resonated with you, we'd love for you to join this community of seekers and believers. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more content like this, where we explore faith, purpose, and wisdom inspired by C.S. Lewis and other great thinkers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps others find this content. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Sharing your thoughts can inspire and encourage others who might be on the same journey. Finally, if you know someone who might need this message, someone who feels lost, overwhelmed, or uncertain about their next step, please share this video with them. A simple act of sharing could be the encouragement they need to take that next step of faith. Thank you for watching, and remember, live faithfully, trust God with your story, and let Him write a masterpiece you couldn't imagine. See you in the next video.